becomes very, very hard to, figure out how do you take that extreme left, right brain idea and marry it with this left brain, universe where anybody will only give you money if and only if you can prove to them that you can make them money, right? So somebody just said again, how did you really start? So can you guys see my screen? Do you see this large purple picture in the middle of it? This is actually a classroom. So this classroom seats 1,000 people. I'm barely able to capture one row in this classroom. And these two gentlemen standing at the head were actually maths teachers. It's a coaching institution in Kanpur. And that's me sitting right there. You can't really tell, but this is me sitting right there. And this was literally my first view of education. Why did I think about education as a sector? Because I lived and worked in 3 continents, and I just felt like every time I used to meet people in the US and in the developed world, their view of life and transitions was extremely different from how we looked at it in India and most of Asia. So for example, they would say things like, oh, I study the philosophy of physics and now I work in a hedge fund. I'm like, what? Like, how do you kind of study the philosophy of physics and then go to a hedge fund? Because in our education system, there is nothing called the philosophy of physics. First of all, there's physics, and if you study physics, you become an engineer or you become like a scientist. How do you become a finance person, right? So so that was the whole thing. It's like, how do you kind of build that kind of confidence to make any kind of career transition and acquire new knowledge at any stage and not feel insecure about choices being made? How do you bring that ideology and that way of being, to our part of the world? And then the second thing around it, when I distill that idea further, I realized that it's got a lot to do with self-esteem and self-validation. Because a lot of times, we sit in classrooms like these, and when we ask questions, we're made to feel that we're asking stupid questions. Or maybe, like, for example, in my college, when I was doing my undergrad, I wanted to build game around fuzzy logic, using fuzzy logic as an applied project for my final year. And the teacher was like, just why don't you just write what you can and forget about building it? You don't have to build it. So the idea was, how do you kind of create a no regrets standard, for all Indian students, and then from there to the world. So that was where I started. Now I was like, how do I actually begin to, wrap my head around the head or tail of education as a sector or a space, much, let alone build a company around no regrets. So my first idea actually was just to build a counseling platform where I thought there will be a not-for-profit, and I will talk to people and I will make sure that they are exploring their full potential, and they're not sort of, they're asking themselves every key question that needs to be asked before making a crucial life decision. But then somebody asked me a question which is very important, and this is something that you have to think about very early when you're validating your startup idea. There are 2 questions you have to answer yourself, and that will determine the rest of the path. The first is, how big is big? Okay. So for me, that person asked me, how big is big for you? I said, well, it's the universe. He says, well, then how are you going to do this without technology? That made me stop. I'm like, I've got to build a platform. I can't just do this through human counseling. It's not going to happen. The second is, how good is good? How honest is your product going to be to actually stand true to the value proposition you're truly, truly trying to deliver? Because that is going to be a pivotal element that's going to drive all of your decisions from that framework. And I'll explain to you more, as time goes on in this conversation. So now let's look at where we're sitting at, right? So there's a person, she's working in Barclays in mobile commerce, and she was in banking. Before that, she was in Africa, did her MBA, basic engineering, and then worked in TCS, did some sales, this and that. And then suddenly she wants to become an edtech entrepreneur. So the first thing you've got to figure out is, how do you become an expert in the space that you're trying to navigate? Okay. So for me, what I've understood is, if you sit in front of a person who believes in a market, like an investor, because creating capital and taking stakeholders along is a very, very important aspect of being an entrepreneur, being a CEO. You can't say, man, I had such a great idea, but then nobody gave me funding. Well, that's your mistake. That's your problem. It means you were not able to convince anybody to give funding. What's very unique about me is that I didn't belong to an IIT. I went to the University of Chicago for my MBA, did my engineering from Thapar, which is like a reasonably or decent school in North India. So I didn't have a network. I had not been working in India for the last 8 years. Now it's been 8 years doing Imbibe. But before that, for 8 years, I was out of the country. And so I literally started from zero. I used to call myself a girl with a plan and a Kali Pili in Bombay. Okay. but I raised almost $1 million of seed funding. So this is the first thing I want to do is I want to tell you about all of the stuff that I learned to validate the idea at the seed stage to get to the point where I was able to raise money for my seed round. And that was one of the most important things that happened to get the momentum going. Okay. So I'm going to touch upon some interesting things that, this is actually excerpts from my seed deck. This used to be our logo back in the day. We have a new brand reveal coming out very soon. But this is what Imbibe, used to be back in the day. So I'm going to go full screen and I'm going to talk you through some of the stuff that are very, very practical lessons to validate to build your understanding of a sector. So the first thing is that if you want to look at a space, right? So if you go to Bain or McKinsey in consulting, what do? They make you read a lot of industry reports, which give you a framework to look at the industry. That, okay, how do you partition it? So typically when you think about edtech, people say there is schooling, then there's university, then there's skilling, then there's pre-undergrad, there's pre-postgrad, there's early childhood, there's pre-K. This is how people typically looked at it. And I picked up this report by Anand Rathi, which everybody was looking at. That was my first step to form an industry analyst view around where people are making money. The second step was to look at every single leading edtech company in the world. I literally looked at 150 global players to understand how they spend, what they spend on, what are they building, why are they building it, who's got traction, who's not got traction, and why. Okay. So it's very interesting. They say that in business you can learn from somebody else's marketing spend. So let's say if you were to do healthcare, if I were to do a healthcare startup tomorrow, I would not just make, the 5 guys in India my competitor set. I would basically look at every single healthcare company that is worth its salt in the world to understand what features are they building, what user experience design do they offer, why is it relevant for that target market, and what kind of traction are they gaining, and what am I learning about the space and what customers want basis, what I'm seeing people do. So this is one of the very important 3 pillars of forming my view around education as a sector to arrive at the problem statement that I would decide to pivot my company on. And what's interesting about our business, and this kind of gave me goosebumps because earlier today I was prepping for this talk a little bit and I was like, let me look through some of the stuff that's happened historically. And what I've realized is we were so good at this early hypothesizing. Our hypothesis still is the same around what will build the world's most impactful edtech company. The only thing that has changed is the execution has become way more focused and it's become way more granular and way deeper. So I'm literally going to take you from my seed deck to my post-Series A deck to today and show you how the same theme has evolved and grown over a period of time. Okay. So practical lesson number 1 is you have to become an expert at whatever space you're in. Because what's going to happen is someone's going to sit across the table and say, why should I put money behind you even if I believe in the market? Everybody understands it's not easy to build a new company, to build a new space. There are going to be mistakes. When a VC gives you money, let's say they give you 12 months of burn. Burn is what, the money that you spend, the cost that you incur every month running the company. The number of months you need to prove yourself from stage A to stage B is going to be based on how much you understand the sector to avoid critical risks and not make rookie mistakes. So there are 2 orthogonal axes, right? One is what you understand about business and technology, irrespective of the sector, which allows you to not make stupid mistakes. The second is what do you understand about what's unique to the sector that allows you to not make stupid mistakes. So you have to be the market expert in the room. So I also want to sort of tell you about how deep we went. Okay, so this is just one company, all right, Mega Study, which is a Korean company. We went super deep trying to understand what is it that they did to grow so fast. So you have to be super honest about it. I used to live in Philadelphia in this time, and literally my entire living room was plastered with screens of every single product to understand. Acha, interesting. This guy's featuring a teacher on his website. This guy's featuring a teacher on his website. 90 out of the 150 are doing that. So what does that mean? What are people perceiving and why is this working? So you've got to build your abstract model of what people are building and keep that as one part of your cake, while you go and explore the other aspects. Okay. See, the point is there's a very beautiful book by the founder of Apex Partners called The Second Bounce of the Ball. All right. So because that, when you throw a ball, it's very easy to understand where it lands but the person who throws it to predict the second, third, and fourth bounce of the ball is the real expert in the industry. So you don't sort of understand what competition is building only because you just want to build a theoretical framework around it. You also do that because you have to answer all the what if questions. So for example, when we started, we had a cornerstone or a theory on which our product was based. Right. All right. But that theory was not supported by anybody around me. Okay. But I knew what the other people were doing and I had a counter around why it did not make sense. Okay. So this is why it's very important to understand what industry players are building. So for example, if you're using AI to do diagnosis, right? And somebody is building only one use case. So for example, the way I would interpret it is somebody is doing blood tests through remote data collection or image processing. Somebody else is doing breast cancer detection. Question is, why is nobody building a horizontal platform to integrate all this data and back it with genetic sequencing? Okay. So it's not just about looking at things piecemeal. It's about taking a step back and thinking, but what does this mean? How does it come together in your head? And what does it tell you about the gap in the market? And what does it tell you about the concentrated red ocean areas of the market? Right. Okay. The second very important peg, but you can't just leave yourself to that, because if you only leave yourself to that, then you only know what the Joneses have done, right? What about your primary discovery of the market? Because what's interesting is that being an incumbent, you might have some market share, but look at EduComp as a company, for example. Incumbency means nothing. You should never be scared of incumbency, okay? If there is a pain point that is genuinely understood and felt, you can go ahead and beat it, and you can convince people to back you if the market is huge. Market is the first and most important thing that has to be large and has to have the ability to absorb spend. The thing that used to really sort of blow my mind was, I was like, wait a minute, you got taxi companies that are 250 billion. I know my education fees was X, my spend on taxis is Y, but the world's largest edtech company is now barely touching 10 billion. Why? Right? So this tells you that there is a gap in the market. So you also have to understand what other people are doing to be able to build your own thesis accurately. The second peg on understanding the market is first principles research into what are people saying, okay, which I call stakeholder study. So here's what I did. I came to India for 3 months. I sat and actually visited firsthand, some 10, 12 cities in India, all right? And then I hired a third-party research agency, all right, to validate what is really happening, how are decisions made, how do people spend? And there's a difference between saying, isn't this aloo paratha really nice, which is a leading question, versus saying, so you wake up in the morning, so what do you like to eat, right? So the second is an inciting model where you don't feed the user questions that you want to hear the answers to. You wait to see whether the questions and the answers that emerge from the conversation go in the direction of your product. Okay. So you have to do an inciting study, but with all stakeholders in the market. So in my case, the stakeholders were students, parents, teachers, data entry operators on the ground in the educational institution, people who are publishing educational content, catch hold of every single person you can find related to that sector. So now let me tell you one more interesting thing. So as you are basically looking through these features, okay, and you're looking through the competitive features and talking to people, it's also important to start forming a product hypothesis. Now, at that point of time, I was reading a book on the lean startup method. I don't think we strictly followed that, but at a high level, I'll give you one very interesting hack, okay? It costs money to build a product. It costs almost no money to build a UI, all right? So if you build a high fidelity prototype of what you intend to provide and you use that as the backbone of your research, you can actually quickly iterate and remove and add, remove and add, remove and add different things, and then see how people are responding to your product, okay? So what we did was we did front-end iteration. So it's like, you're painting a picture and you're showing it to people, and then you paint it again, or you make modifications and you again show it to people, and to see how they react, right? So the time when I jumped to India was when, our entire prototype to Imbibe.com, reaction to Imbibe.com, which ended up becoming an information-led product. So I'll show you how we distilled all the information together, was massive. So if you look at top 2 box scores, right? Like for FMCG, if it's 80% plus, they go and launch the product. For eat out restaurants, if it's 70% plus, you go and launch the product. So for us, it was 98% likability and 88% registration intent. and people wanted to pay money, okay? And people were saying, I wish this was there, right? And we were like, you know what? I was like, let's move to India, okay, and let's do this. So let's just go back and recap, what we did at the seed stage. The first thing that we said it's important to become a sector expert. Becoming a sector expert literally cost me 2 lakh rupees in 3 months. All right. The first thing I did was understood what everybody else is building. The second thing that I did was I actually went and met people firsthand. Right. The third thing I did was I prototyped the front end. I didn't even need developer time for that. Okay. But you can make these really nice clickable experiences using Marvel or Adobe XD or whatever. Those time we used to have something called Just in Time or something, which was a clickable prototype app.
Right.
And you can take that to marketing and make the product come alive in front of consumers and really understand what's happening. And then the other thing is, this is not about, a theoretical framework, right? This is about now distilling all these insights to understand what is the need that's going to be the backbone of your startup idea. Okay. And how does this need kind of scale across the entire sector? Because remember, I said how big is everybody?
Right.
So I was like, even if you have to start somewhere, because you can't build the entire market all at once, right? I was very clear. I was building a horizontal platform because where did I start from? I want no kid to have any regrets. So even if I have to start some market, I was not going to become a test prep wonder as a company.
Right.
Okay. So what we realized was, in a world of players selling education as mobile, people were like, we're a mobile app. And that became the cornerstone of building an education company. I was like, a mobile app is a channel.
Right.
Fantastic products are omni-channel, right? So how can mobile be the cornerstone of a product? A product has to solve a problem. A product cannot be a channel. The second thing everybody was saying was content. Dude, there's so much content in the world. Then why is it not working? Why are people like Harika, joining the star batch of Narayana and then bottoming out and failing in physics in their 12th grade? Doesn't make sense. So what we realized was it's not about consumption of content. It was about contextual consumption, but timely help and direction for kids.
Right.
It was about, the FOMO of not knowing what's happening for parents. And it was about scaling with quality for professors, which ended up becoming a data problem. Okay. So, and the other thing I'll say, one more last thing to you guys is that we started with test prep. Okay. Why? Because my thesis was at that point of time, EdTech wasn't, fashionable. All right. So the thesis there was very simple that look, everybody says test prep will never go online. In China, EdTech started with K-12, but they had a very hard time getting users online after 8th grade because everybody said serious education can never happen online. My point was, can I translate spend online? Can I translate time online? And because of the biggest spend areas were also around test prep. Okay. So this is how we also chose a very careful slice of the market, all right, to start somewhere and enter and be practical. Okay. So what you've seen in the first part of this conversation, right, you've seen that we kind of started with a very high level esoteric problem, no regrets. Then a person who was a complete outsider to education jumped in and tried to make sense of it, right? This deck raised $1 million, guys, and the point is everything was data backed. And everything I could answer 40 questions back. If people ask me why this, why not this, why this, why not this, because I was the expert in the room. Okay. And the interesting thing is the idea that we started to validate, Imbibe today is the world's largest artificial intelligence platform in education. Okay. It all started with the problem is information. It is not more content.